Time now for the Sunday Talk. Tonight, the politics of sexual assault trials. The Ghomeshi trial is still hearing from complainants, but 1 week in, there's already a new chapter to a long-standing national conversation.
Jan, you want to say anything? Jan, how are you this morning?
The whole world was watching as two women took the stand, repeating their accusations Ghomeshi had assaulted them.
He slapped me with an open hand.
His lawyer went after their credibility, saying they hadn't been forthcoming with the court about their relationships with the former radio star.
Is there anything else that you haven't told us that we should know?
No.
Explicit and inviting emails were revealed, showing both complainants continued to reach out to the man they say attacked them. Gasps were heard in the courtroom, as this case had helped spur a movement of women coming forward to allege long-buried histories of sexual assault. The hashtag #BeenRapedNeverReported trended on Twitter.
It's sort of like, rape survivors now are cheering each other on to come out and to post it, which I think is absolutely beautiful.
Many women felt a sense of solidarity, hoping society would treat their accusations more seriously.
Blame the system! Not the victim!
But another high-profile case proved that some people do lie.
All I can tell you is there is no substantive basis to conclude what is described in that article happened that night.
Rolling Stone magazine had to retract its story, a rape on campus, after it was proven untrue. So now, 1 week into the Ghomeshi trial, we want to know where the old he said, she said debate stands now. I'm joined by our panelists. John Moore is a talk radio host in Toronto. Jonathan Kay is now editor-in-chief at Walrus Magazine and used to practice law in the U.S. Farah Khan is the sexual violence support coordinator at Ryerson University in Toronto. And Susan Chapman is a lawyer who has been on both the prosecution and defense sides of many sexual assault cases. So with that background, Susan, I'm going to start with you. There was so much chatter this week after the first week of testimony that the Crown's case against Ghomeshi had been seriously weakened because of all of this evidence that these women had reached out to him in a sexual manner after the alleged attacks. So seeing the suggestion being that their accusations weren't credible. How do you see that?
Well, I can't possibly comment on the specific credibility of the complainants in this case. I can only talk more generally about having been involved in hundreds of these cases, what you can anticipate seeing by way of behavior of complainants after the fact. And there is a lot of seemingly counterintuitive behavior. That's one thing that you are confronted with routinely. So, for example, the idea that you would report right away, that's a false assumption. Most people never report, and if they do, it's often with great delay. Why would a woman continue to associate with a perpetrator after the fact? Why would she flirt with them or sometimes even engage in a sexual relationship with them after the fact? Surely that means, common sense dictates, that means she must have lied, because who's going to have sex with somebody who's raped them? Unfortunately, the actual experience of women who are involved and have been the victims of sexual violence would suggest that that is commonplace. That is not unusual.
You deal all the time, Farah, with women at Ryerson who say that they've been attacked in some way. How did the stories fit with what you heard this week?
It resonates very much. And I think the thing that we kind of expect is that there is a perfect victim. And sexual violence, we react to it in the same way. People have different experiences and also how trauma impacts them. So trauma alters memory. We also know that survivors survivors or complainants may have different relationships with their abuser much after the fact. So they may still be in contact with them. They may still be in relationship with them. There's no perfect way to experience this.
What did you take from this week, John?
I found it interesting the phrase you used, which was perfect victim. And I think as a journalist, I was following the lead up to the trial. And it's interesting that there was so much vested in it from a political point of view, identity politics, and you could tell that a lot of people really wanted it to be a battle between perfect victims and a perfect villain. And they have no understanding of how these things play out in courts. The problem is with a lot of domestic violence and a lot of rape cases is that it isn't a perfect villain against perfect victims. And what you see is often the complexities of, in some cases, highly dysfunctional individuals playing out. You see this email, texts, the emotions are strong in such a way that maybe sometimes a judge or a jury will say that it's so complex that it's impossible to conclude anything beyond a reasonable doubt. And then all of the activists who in a very humane way were cheering on the people who said they had been abused, they end up being disappointed. And so there's a sense of anticlimax and a sense of betrayal by the legal system.
What was your sense, and what sort of feedback are you getting? Because, you know, there's been this whole Roosh V, the pickup artist, was supposed to be in town this week, and there was all pushback against that men are wronged. Like, what does this do to the old he said, she said debate?
Well, I mean, the incredible thing about a sexual assault case is usually the victim is also the eyewitness and the only eyewitness, in which case it really is he said, she said. And we can get more into the whole gender issue, I think, as the discussion goes on, because I think a lot of men try to take away from a trial, especially like this one. See, men are unfairly tarred. Women are to be believed. They can't be questioned. A woman can't even provide, the defense attorney can't even provide a vigorous defense without attacking a woman. But another takeaway that people are talking about on my show is that it used to just be he said, she said. Now there's this incredible chain of digital evidence, and as we've discovered, probably to the horror of a lot of people, your archives, even if you've destroyed them, can go back 10, 15 years.
Well, that was sent a lot of people reeling when all of these emails, these pictures, these letters emerged that the women had not said existed before. What do you, we don't know exactly what happened in the courtroom or with their planned case, but what do you advise people to do with emails and the like?
When I speak to women, clients who are anticipating going forward with these types of allegations, I tell them, rest assured, he has every piece of paper you ever wrote. He has every letter, note, and email.
Why do you say that?
Predators are pack rats. He has it in his safety deposit box, waiting for the day when you do decide to come forward. It's actually very typical in these cases to see people hang on to that type of documentation. So I like them to know, I know you think this is about that night when you were not consenting, but believe me, that's not going to be the focus of the trial. The focus of the trial is going to be all of the peripheral events and all of the communications before and after the event.
So how much has this changed the whole conversation, John, about sexual assault?
Well, I think it's highlighted this chasm between the two sides, because there is in our culture a powerful movement that says that we just have to believe people who claim they have been sexually assaulted, and that it's important for women to come forward, that they immediately be believed, not just by their own attorneys, but by the police and by everybody around them. But then that runs into our legal system where there's a presumption of innocence, and every defendant has the right to a vigorous defense, including cross-examination. So you have this Twitter campaign, I believe so-and-so, I believe so-and-so, and this headwind of solidarity for the victim. And then suddenly you run into the criminal justice system where it's business as usual, which is to say that if you are accused of a crime, you get all the procedural safeguards associated with being the defendant in a criminal case traditionally, and you can't reconcile those two. You can't reconcile the idea that we have to believe all victims with the idea that when they come to court, they are going to be ruthlessly cross-examined. And that just can't change, because it's the basis of our legal system is the right to a vigorous defense.
So what impact do you see this having, Farah, this week? I mean, women have always been nervous about coming forward. You've, I'm sure, dealt with that. Will this scare women off more?
Well, we know that less than 10% of women do report sexual violence. So we know that that is already existing. We have to actually create a better system in our court systems to actually support survivors when they come forward, or support people when they make a complaint of sexual violence. I think the whacking of the complainant, we're seeing that in court, where we're seeing their past histories come up. We're seeing the way in which they react to trauma, which is, we're having normal human reactions. And so I think this is a piece that we need to name. Do I think that it'll cause a chilling effect? I think it's twofold. I think some people will say, this is really difficult. I don't want to go through a case like this. I don't want to see my credibility on the line. On the other hand, we may see more people feel safer too, because they see actually all the dynamics that happen in sexual violence.
So, Susan, what would you say to someone that you love after a week like this, or after your career? Would you advise someone to Go forward with the complaint?
Over the 25 years that I've been doing this, my advice has changed from you absolutely should go ahead sometimes to if you were my sister, I'd tell you to go home now. And usually I'm somewhere in between. And I view my role as providing people with the advice, the information they need to make an informed decision themselves as to whether they want to participate in the process. But when you look at how this trial's unfolded, it's hardly any surprise why somebody wouldn't want to sign up to be a witness in a case like this. It's not fun.
How do you see it changing the conversation or trials going forward, John?
Well, you know what? I think this case, people, Jonathan, you mentioned this, that a lot of people going into the case saw it as a proxy for a lot of arguments, especially the idea that a woman gets savaged on the stand. I think this has actually turned into a very poor case as a proxy to argue a lot of those things. And actually, to the two things, the arguments you folks have been making about the idea that it may be normal to behave like this, in which case, put an expert on the stand and depose them about how normal a behavior that is, because that does not mitigate the possibility that the witnesses are lying. And I think that's the really important thing. There's this prejudice against the notion that a witness actually could be lying. And let's face it, witnesses lie quite routinely.
Witnesses do lie, and I don't want to ever
Or they're
see...
mistaken.
Or they're mistaken. In all cases, and I would never want to see the presumption of innocence in any way dilute it. But that being said, it's not inconsistent to, yes, you should call expert evidence on this, but there's a problem with always clinicizing women's evidence, first of all. And second of all, there's always a problem with why do women need an expert to explain what is ordinary behavior for us when men don't routinely in criminal cases need experts to explain the way they behaved in certain scenarios. So why do we need an expert as a proxy for our credibility? That's always my concern.
Where does this leave us, do you think, John, 1 week into the trial in terms of this long-standing debate we've had?
I think it leaves us with a way to try and find creative solutions whereby you can indulge a defendant's right to vigorously contest the charges against him with maintaining your dignity and not having every aspect of your sexual history aired in open court. I, for instance, would be open to, is there any way that these proceedings don't always have to be in public? Can part of these things be sealed? It must be, in many ways, mortifying for many of these victims or professed victims to have all of their dirty laundry aired in court. Could there not be a more private proceeding when matters of this sort of sensitivity are involved?
Well, the third witness is in court this week, and obviously we're mid-trial, so we'll see what happens. But thanks to all of you so much for being part of this kind of difficult discussion.